Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. And today we do have another amazing guest. It's Rebecca Arnold. She is a professional certified coach and founder of Root Coaching Consulting LLC, a holistic leadership and coaching firm. With a forthcoming book, The Rooted Renegade: Transform Within, Disrupt the Status Quo, and Unleash Your Legacy, which was released in June 2024 on Amazon, Rebecca empowers mission-driven leaders across academia, education, medicine, law, and social impact sectors. Known for her straight-talking, big-hearted approach, Rebecca blends wisdom, humor, and warmth to guide her clients through life's complexities. She holds a JD from Northeastern University and a BA from Brown University. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Now, before we dig too much into it, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And your question is, which cartoon character do you most resonate with and why?
I was saying I love this question because there's so many layers, right? So I would say the mom in The Incredibles, who is super elastic and can flex in all kinds of different scenarios. She's both on a mission and also very committed to her family. And she kind of gives people the what for when needed, but is also so loving and kind. So she's a rock star. I can relate to her.
It's an excellent choice. I think I prefer what was his name, Jack?
The baby. Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, he's my favorite. He's always getting in trouble. I like him.
He's got a lot of spunk.
That he does. So, Rebecca, why don't you tell us a little bit about, your journey and sort of how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I'm trained as an attorney and I worked in education policy and in the federal government and for a number of nonprofit organizations. And I had a really painful experience with burnout. I think probably many of your listeners can relate. And there were a lot of factors, as there are always in kind of people's experiences with burnout. But mine I attribute in part to undiagnosed ADHD for a long time. And I had all these experiences that looking back make a lot of sense. But in the moment, I didn't realize the cost of some of the coping mechanisms I had that weren't supportive of me. So I had an experience. I am a procrastination junkie, which has gotten substantially better. But in college, I would stay up all night to write papers. In law school, I would do the same. And I ended up in law school even having an experience where I stayed up so many nights in a row that I started hallucinating while I was writing a paper. It was really terrifying. And when I was doing this kind of high pressure job while also trying to manage my family and in a challenging work environment, I felt like a lot of my challenges really caught up with me. And I had an experience where I, in the middle of a talk, had a panic attack for the first time. I'd never had a panic attack before. And it really kicked off a cascade of kind of burnout related symptoms and experiences. And so after healing from that experience, I had this vacuum of purpose that I think people can sometimes relate to. It's like I had found what I thought was my dream job and colossally burnt out and had a terrible experience and was asking myself these big questions about like, what do I want to do now? What kind of contribution can I make in a way that aligns with who I am and also prioritizes my well-being. So it led me to coaching. And I think of myself as the kind of coach who I really needed and didn't know I needed. And so the way I show up for people is really powerful and important and enables them to stay in the game as they shake things up and lead in their own unique way and bring their talents and all of that. That's a piece of my story, and what has led me to coaching and really lights me up about this kind of work.
So your real turning point in your story there is where, you thought you had a dream job, and then what was the turning point, that sort of panic attack in the middle of that talk you had?
Yeah, it was a panic attack, and then it sort of, I mean, there were multiple factors that kind of came together and just caused this cascading, like anxiety, depression, insomnia. I mean, I was really not able to function effectively. And it was a well-being crisis. It was like a crisis on a lot of levels. And definitely a dark night of the soul. And when you're in the middle of a dark night of the soul, you do not appreciate the lessons it will hold for you later on. It's a real kick in the pants. And that's what it was for me, for my husband, for my family. And it caused me to really like take a step back and look at my life differently. And it's so interesting looking back on it because the kind of work I do with clients now, as I said, is what I really needed. And it's also, it's kind of like a highlight reel of the experiences I've had. So I worked in education policy. I work with superintendents. I work with attorneys. I understand kind of the pressure within the legal sphere. And I've worked in nonprofits. And so it's like a beautiful blend of all of those things, but I could not have predicted when I was really suffering that that was going to be kind of the end point for me in a positive way.
No, and it's true what you say. I mean, when we're at those points, we don't always know where we're going. We just have to kind of keep the faith and know that we're at the other end of those. How did you start to pull yourself? What were some of the ways that you got yourself to start to come out of it?
Yeah. So one was really, therapy, medicine. I mean, those were the two critical pieces. I also, I didn't realize so many folks, you know, have an experience with a chronic illness. I have a chronic illness as well, and I didn't realize the contribution that that was making. So it's like a really multiple factor kind of experience. And so I had to really tease the pieces apart and recognize, okay, I have a chronic illness that affects my ability to metabolize stress. I have an adrenal disease. And so I have to be really mindful about how much stress I'm under and how I metabolize stress in other ways because biochemically it doesn't work as well for me as it does for other people. I had to start asking myself in therapy and in my own kind of exploration, what were some of the mindsets and habits that contributed to setting up the circumstances that contributed to burnout? And it's really interesting. The more people I talk to about having burnout experiences, the more I've seen this common pattern of a lot of creativity kind of emerging post burnout. Like once people actually heal, take the time to rest, get better. If there's medicine, they need to get medicine. If they need a break from the workplace to take a small break and have a little bit of space, there's this almost like unleashing of creativity that seems to happen that then starts to often be the catalyst for something new. And that was my experience. It's been as I talk to people, it's been other people's experiences as well. I started writing a lot. I started meditating a lot and getting into some of different kinds of mindfulness practices, Reiki, intuition. It really sort of some pieces of my life that had been left out for a long time, I started to reconnect with. And I felt more whole, I guess, through that process. But it really required taking a step back. Like I left my job. I had to take a step back and really start looking at both internally and externally what were some of the contributors and how to change things so that I didn't recreate that again.
It's interesting that what you say about the burnout and the creativity because I hadn't really reflected on my own case really that much, but you're right that afterwards it was like the spur of creativity. But I think at least in my own personal case and some other cases that I know, it was more a fact that what they were doing wasn't in alignment, and now that they were free to go back to kind of who they really were at their core, then it sort of gave them that permission, I guess, to be creative again. Is that what you think's going on?
I really appreciate that perspective. I do think that is absolutely a part of it. Like we spend a lot of us spend a lot of our time like cramming ourselves in boxes, whatever box that might be, in a relationship that actually isn't aligned for us, in an organization where our values are mismatched and we're going through the day to day really not feeling good about the contribution we're making, or we're doing work that isn't aligned with our strengths and we're kind of beating our heads against the wall because of there's so many different boxes, or we've been told by society we have to be a particular way and we're not. And it takes an extraordinary amount of energy to contort ourselves to fit that. And so I do think you're right. Like when we experience burnout, we're like at the bottom of a pit and it's sort of like, well, at this point, I may as well, I've tried putting myself in a box and this is where it left me. So I may as well really circle back to the things that actually are aligned for me and matter for me and use my skills and are aligned with my purpose and all of those things. So I think you're right. There's like a dovetailing of that, like unleashedness that enables people to access parts of themselves they haven't in a long time.
Or just to go back to, what Buster Moon said in Sing, right? When you hit rock bottom, the only way you can go is up. So,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter what you do,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going lower. I guess that's another
Yep.
way to look at it.
Yep. It's interesting though, because in my own, I don't know what your experience has been, but in my experience, I feel like one of the challenges of having the experience in the pit is there's almost it's almost like there's so much can be so much shame associated with it sometimes that we don't look at it for long enough. Like I'm not saying like sit in the pit as long as possible, but more like look at it from a self-compassionate lens. And in order to excavate some of the lessons that are there for us and forgive ourselves for kind of how we might have been showing up for a long time, choices we might have made. Um, for myself, I think one of the things that inhibited my um, healing from burnout is the shame I was carrying about like how things unfolded in my last few weeks at my job. Like I am a person who is like strongly believes in integrity and transparency and collaboration and supporting people. And I felt like the way things unfolded, I left with very little notice and in a way I would never choose to leave a job. And I carried so much shame because it was misaligned with how I think about myself that I think that shame kind of cycle really inhibited my healing. So I need to come to terms and forgive myself for that part of the process as well.
No, when you talk about self-compassion too, it's so it's difficult sometimes because a lot of questions that people have are, well, and how do I go about forgiving myself? And so one of the examples I like to give, and I like to say is at the end of the day, no matter who you are, where you're from, what your value system may or may not be, at the end of the day, we're all operating on information and we're doing the best that we can with that information that we have at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that information is, erroneous or, incorrect, incomplete, is beside the point, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we always do the best with what we have. I mean, nobody sets out to do the worst thing they can with the
Mm-hmm.
information.
Mm-hmm.
And I used the example of doctors from the 1950s. You know, I love this example because, you see those old ads, doctors running around, nurses smoking cigarettes, and, them
Mm-hmm.
saying that, oh, camels are actually healthy, and all doctors smoke camels, and,
Mm-hmm.
20 years after, we're like, oops, they cause cancer,
Mm-hmm.
so if you can forgive doctors for that, major oversight, then I think you can forgive yourself for anything that you might have done or not done.
Mm-hmm. I love that's a great example. I have never heard that before. Um, and it does paint the like information component of forgiveness and doing the best we can in a very stark light. I think one of the things that I notice is that many of us have, especially people who have ADHD or other kinds of neurodiversities, have used shame as a way to kind of force compliance or improve themselves or make a situation better. And it's almost like an over functioning shame muscle that is just overused. And so, one of the things that I practice sometimes with my clients is just simply like, how would you speak to a child who made a mistake, who was doing the best they can, who didn't have all the skills needed, who may have been having a hard time. And there's often a tenderness that people can access when they think about a child that they seldom use with themselves. It's a voice they seldom use with themselves. They use words that they don't often use with themselves. And sometimes that can open up a little bit of space for self-compassion and start to see like, okay, if I increase by 1% the amount of time I spoke to myself about in that way, you know, I would feel substantially better instead of beating myself up all day about various things. And so I do think there's so much, you know, the expression about the second arrow, like the first arrow is like the pain that's caused, and the second arrow is like what you do to yourself about what you have done. And so there's so much pain that we inflict on ourselves and in shaming ourselves and not accessing the self-compassion that is available. And it's a practice. Like most of us do not have a lot of experience speaking to ourselves that way.
Yeah, there's a reason for that, and we have to understand that we're coming from an evolutionary standpoint where we do have to fight that. I'm gonna say, I guess it's, for lack of a better word, and we tend to operate our lives from a place of fear or avoidance, or we're avoiding discomfort, avoiding pain, and so what happens when we have these things where we make these mistakes and they're horrible, we overuse that shame muscle simply because it's the way that we remember things. We remember, oh, we don't really want to do that. But I mean, it goes back to, that's not a really good way to handle it, because that's just ripping away parts of you to fit into society, right?
Yeah, and as you say, it's sort of, I think of it in some ways as kind of a vestigial structure of evolution. Like we used to live in tribes, and surviving was crucial in maintaining our status within the tribe and fitting in and belonging and all of that. And so there's a practice I use when I'm public speaking now that is, I'll have the thought like, oh, these people are all judging me, like based on the expressions on their face, right? And those of us who are empathetic, like, can imagine all kinds of things because we're pretty good at reading people and all of that. And so one of the things I'll say to myself is this feeling that they are going to kick me out of the tribe is old. This is like from way, way, way back. Like the amount of stress that causes, that's old. Like I'm fine. With my people, I am fine. I am safe. I belong. And so it's almost reassuring ourselves that the judgment out there really, even though it can feel very significant, that when we look at kind of our family, our friends, our colleagues, the people that really care about us, we're fine, right? And so most of us, and so it's kind of adjusting that like physical felt sense sometimes with the reality on the ground. And I do think there's just some old stuff we carry, and it makes complete sense. But we're an evolving animal.
Well, yeah, and I mean, just going back to evolution, it seems like society is sometimes working against us too. I mean, we have so many distractions, and we have so many, just social media. Talk about, tribes. You have to post all your videos, but only the good ones. So now it's, it's kind of like if you were in a tribe and you're comparing yourself to James, who collected 3 berries, but you didn't see James fall off a cliff and get scratched up and have to fight a tiger to get those 3 berries, right? So a lot of times it is still ingrained into us even now.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I feel like really limiting social media is a good thing for most of us. It does, as you say, it doesn't tell the full story of what's happening for people and gives us a false sense of competence, of connection, of belonging, of lots of things that actually are not true in real life in terms of our day-to-day experiences. And I love the example you gave about that not seeing the process behind the berries.
So if somebody is coming here, and that sort of ties into something pretty big too, which is validation, right? And this has been the cornerstone of pretty much every single mass failing we've had on this planet, right? If you dig deep enough, at some point it was all about validation in some form or another. So what do you say to clients? People come to you and they're having an issue. Maybe they're stuck on social media, or maybe they're feeling like they're not good enough or they're not enough. How do you really start to unravel that with them?
So first, I think it's fine that we need validation. So sometimes people come to me embarrassed about their need for validation. And going back actually to evolution, like it makes complete sense that we crave that validation and feeling of safety and security. So first, like it's basically if we're trying to solve any challenge in our life, shaming ourselves about it, it does not. So we first have to kind of understand it's probably playing a role and that was designed to help us, even though it's hurting us in the moment, and kind of appreciate that part of us that is seeking that. So, with validation, I might say to a client, like, how did you notice that helped you when you were younger, when you were validated? What was your experience of that? Okay. And what is your experience now of seeking that from other people in the way that you have been going about doing that? And for some people, it's a tweak, right? It's like, well, I've been seeking validation from the wrong kind of person. And actually, my partner, my friend, my colleague, when I need some like cheerleading and backup, I can go to them reliably and get that. I think the idea that we have to self-generate all of this, every like motivation, validation, um, focus, purpose, like all of the things, we have to do it all ourselves is totally a setup for failure. And it's okay to need to rely on other people for lots of these things. Like I think of it as if we all had a pit crew, imagine what we would be capable of. I think it's just the idea of like doing all this stuff ourselves is bananas. And so when I'm working with a client though on like a lot of feelings of not enough and like over seeking validation or avoiding things because of the fear of not getting validated, we often look at how they're speaking to themselves about it. So when I have a client who's avoiding things because of a fear of failure, they're actually a very, very small piece of that is other people's reactions. It is, which lasts a very short time. So let's say I bomb a presentation. That presentation lasts an hour and I might get some negative feedback, a couple emails, a couple phone calls, but I could spend 2 weeks beating myself up about that presentation or longer, right? And that's what a lot of folks, that's a lot of people's experience day to day. And so when we're fearing failure or seeking validation, oftentimes it's simply a question of changing our inner narrative and our inner dialogue about it. So that could look like I goofed, and this gets back to self-compassion. Like I goofed in that presentation and I learned these 3 things from it. And going forward, here's what I'm going to do differently. And nobody's perfect and it's okay. And like we do some somatic practices to kind of settle. I'll work with a client to kind of settle their nervous system in order to take that in. So, and it's almost, it gets back a little bit to like, how would you speak to somebody else about this? Because sometimes it's way easier to have language around that than in how we would speak to ourselves. So if you were talking, if a friend bombed a presentation, what would you say to them? You did your best. Like you prepared for this and there were some unexpected circumstances. Or lots of people bomb presentations every day. It existed. Like it's okay and you're going to be okay. And so sometimes that modeling of language, then we'll have a client start to practice that for themselves. So they start to create their own internal monologue that has their own validation, and they can complement that with some backup from a friend or a coach or a colleague or whomever if they're feeling like they need an extra boost.
No, that's very good advice, and it actually brings to mind something too. Why do you think it's so difficult for us to to look inward? I actually remembered a funny. I forget who told me this, but he said something along the lines of, if I wanted to look inward, my eyes will be facing backward, like facing inward.
I love that. So why is it so difficult to look inward? I mean, have you ever had the experience of meditating?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay. So when we start meditating and we actually kind of try to sit in quiet, even for 2 minutes, the amount of thoughts that we have in those 2 minutes are very negative, oftentimes, and very distracting, very, like it pulls us out, right? In meditation, the practice is obviously that your attention gets drawn away and you pull it back and you pull it back and you pull it back. But I think so much busyness and angst and lack of prioritizing and so many things come back to our inability to be with ourselves because it can be painful there. And I think we operate on top of that a lot. We make choices on top of that. We create habits on top of that. So when you think about like numbing behaviors, like scrolling social media endlessly or watching television or mindlessly eating or drinking, we're trying to avoid the feelings often that come when we're not doing those things, right? So, okay, if I were to sit on the couch and just sit what would be there, right? Well, I might be worried about tomorrow. I might be thinking about what I did today. I might be asking myself some big questions I haven't given myself space to confront before. And so that is very intimidating to most of us, often because we don't have the experience, we don't have the skills necessarily to do it in a way that feels safe for us. And so we avoid it. And those avoidance behaviors can start to take over. And I think one of the things that was so challenging for people during the pandemic, I mean, there were a lot of them, but we spent a lot of time with ourselves during the pandemic, most of us, and a lot of time with our loved ones if we were fortunate in that way. And I think a lot of people had to confront many, many aspects of their lives that they had not confronted before and recognize were really not working for them. Now, whether people acted on that is a whole other matter. But I think when you look at the pain that people experience in like really confronting what's going on for them and how much effort we go through to avoid that, it's clear why we kind of avoid looking inward at our peril. I mean, like it motivates so much action that is really not in alignment for many of us. What do you think? How do you see that?
Well, I mean that's very true. I mean, I remember my own first few sessions of shadow work. Not helpful at all.
Mm-hmm.
At all.
Mm-hmm.
You and just for the record here, I do want to say that before you do any kind of shadow work, I would definitely recommend talking to a professional, either a therapist or a coach, because I went it alone as a smart person might.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
go, I'm a coach. I've been a therapist. I know what I'm doing. And that it was really, really awful. And it
Mm-hmm.
took me like a day and a half to like, and at that point, like I meditate every day and stuff, but that really, like actually going in there, it was a guided meditation on YouTube as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, just so you know that those guided meditations are out there. Just please, before you do anything
Mm-hmm.
labeled shadow, just consult somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of coping mechanisms that operate in order to avoid us looking at those things.
No,
And so, yeah, it requires some support often to go in there. I mean, it's such, it's such tender work in that area. I mean, I had a therapist who did internal family systems, and it took me, the way that she was doing it took me multiple days to recover from. Like, it ended up not being a good approach for me, actually. And that was in a professional context with someone who was trained in it, who was a therapist. And so it's a lot of this is kind of, the notion in trauma work of the window of tolerance, where it's like we can only, we need to, it is optimal for us to stay within the zone that we can tolerate without our system getting too flooded or too overwhelmed and all of that. And what's tricky is kind of knowing when you're getting close to the edge of your window of tolerance without going over the edge. And that's what experts are really good at, is recognizing what some of those signs are and how to kind of bring you back into kind of a grounded presence so that you can kind of get some space. And then when you're ready, maybe during another session or later, go back in a way that feels safer to you. So it's really activating. I mean, that kind of work is very activating.
no, for sure. And just to people out there who are maybe thinking about it too. I mean, those the thoughts that come in when you first start meditating. I think I think Eckhart Tolle kind of said it best. It was kind of like the roommate. Like, would you accept a roommate that was constantly screaming at you all the time and saying bad things? Like, would you pay attention to them or would you like ignore them? If they were
Mm-hmm.
literally in the same
Mm-hmm.
room.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was an interesting perspective on it as well. Like, would we accept that negative talk from someone else? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and if we would, I guess the question is why would we? But if we wouldn't, then why do we accept it from the roommate?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's tricky because it's almost like a roommate, like a Little Red Riding Hood situation. It's like the roommate is like, "Hey, I'm looking out for you. Don't do that." Right? It's like there is underneath the like negativity and stuff that you really don't want to hear and wouldn't accept from a stranger. There is like there is a piece where it's often trying to protect you in some way. Like it's me. intentions are positive, but its means are crappy. And so sometimes, like, I'll talk to that voice sometimes and just say, with compassion, and just say, hey, like, that doesn't feel that great. What are you trying to communicate to me? What are you trying to let me know? What are you worried about? And not to kind of get into a whole back and forth, but really to understand what's underneath some of what's motivating that part. And so when I was working on my book, this came up a lot. And what that voice would often say is when it was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't write this. No one's going to want to read it. Blah, 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 just sort of on a loop. I would say, what are you worried about? And it would say, I want this book to matter. I want this book to help people. And so I would say, okay, same. So what would make you feel better? And usually there would be some nuggets that it would offer after it quieted down a little bit. Like, you need to make a plan, or you're not sticking with what you had intended, or you're over editing. Like, you're never going to release this thing, so stop editing. So it's almost like parsing that the message and not getting like sucked into the message, but looking underneath what it's trying to do. That has been really supportive to me and my clients, instead of alienating that part, which can sometimes it can get really loud because it's like, hey, you're not listening to me.
Yeah. No, that's definitely one way to look at it. And I mean, you are right. I mean, the well, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's there as sort of a protection mechanism, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
even procrastination, even depression, anger. I mean, yeah, pretty much anything is there. It's there supposedly for your best interest, not to hurt you. The issue we run into is that it reacts the same as if someone holding a gun to your head as if
Mm-hmm.
you are sitting down to take a test, right? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes sometimes the biggest issue is just really perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk to my procrastination too sometimes. I'll say, like, I'll, I'll say, Rebecca, you are, when I know when I bust out the vacuum, that is a tell that I am procrastinating. So I'll say, Rebecca, what are you avoiding and why? Like, what's going on here with the vacuum? And so we'll have a little chat. And usually there's some gold there, but it's almost like, and this is, I think, where a meditation practice comes in. It's like having a little bit of a meta awareness of what's going, like watching what's going on. Like, I'm procrastinating right now. Okay, I don't have to judge that. I don't have to shame it. I don't have to make it wrong, but I can, if it's something I don't want to be doing, really, in terms of my bigger goals and all that, I can just start to ask it, what's going on here. But it takes catching ourselves, because if we don't catch ourselves, it runs away with us. And then time goes by and we're like, what happened? But the house is clean.
You know, I don't know. I don't know if I could speak for anyone else, but I mean, I think I'd love to have you be a procrastinator at my house. Then then I wouldn't have to worry about anything. I mean, at least it's something
Yeah.
productive, right? I mean,
Yeah, it is generally.
most people when we procrastinate, myself included, we tend to do things that aren't that productive. So
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
at least yours is productive.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's vacuuming all the time. I have my vices as well. But what I notice sometimes is I mean, for me anyway, what I notice is I'll do dopamine rich activities. Vacuuming is not a dopamine rich activity, but like scrolling social media or whatever is. Um, and so I will do it very intentionally. I'll notice, like, if my motivation is waning, I'm I'm in need of a little bit of a hit of something from a dopamine perspective. And so I'll set a timer and be like, I'm going to scroll social media for 5 minutes. And then when the timer goes off, I do notice I have a little bit of a boost, but it takes a lot of self control to actually stop when the timer goes off. So sometimes I'll make myself get up or do something to change my context a little bit to break it. Um, I don't know. Have you played with that at all? Like, kind of interrupts for procrastination?
Yeah. So there's different ways you can do it. Some of them are based on the Pomodoro technique, which is
Hmm.
you work for a bit and then you have short bursts and you have a break. It does take a lot of self control. Some things are gamification, little
Hmm.
rewards if you actually go ahead and do something. In terms of scrolling, though, I mean, I don't even like. I don't even open Instagram if I'm planning on being productive, just because it's
Mhm.
designed, specifically designed to get you to stay there as long as possible. That's their goal.
Mhm. Yep.
And actually, I've talked to a few other people. I don't know what your take is on this, but it's almost like it's training us to have ADHD, because it's
Mhm.
training us that, oh, well, this is lasting 30 seconds. Let's get to the next thing.
Mhm.
So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that social media is kind of being harmful in that sense? It's training us to have short attention spans?
I definitely think so. I mean, everything from like the length of news articles to reels to all kinds of social media content to ads to, I mean, the whole thing is, I'm not going to get this right, but there was a study where basically it was talking about how our attention span for like the average neurotypical person has shrunk in half in the last like 5 years. And so it's like happening at this rapid pace, and our brains are not like, our brains are evolving, but I guess I would say devolving. And it concerns me a lot. I mean, especially I have a 15 and 18-year olds, and I can see it in them, especially the older one, that it's like, okay, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And the capacity to kind of hang with something and really like grapple with it and not have a bunch of inputs simultaneously is much more challenging. And what I've seen in my practice is that for like, I have a lot of different strategies I use because of my own ADHD. And for people who do not have ADHD, most people are currently grappling with inattention, challenges in motivation, difficulty with task completion, difficulty with starting tasks, many things that folks with ADHD wrestle with. And so a lot of those strategies are proving very helpful. Um, and I do worry, I'm kind of worried about what's going to happen with this trajectory over time of our shrinking attention spans. Because there's a discomfort and a boredom sometimes in sticking with something.
Mhm.
And so having us have the experience of like actually enjoying that is tricky when we're constantly getting these dopamine hits all day long. If we're doing a lot of scrolling. Um, yeah. So I try to force myself to like read physical books, put the phone away. I have clients that have lock boxes for their phones sometimes if they're doing deep work. I mean, there are all these strategies we're needing to employ. But I think what's interesting is that because of some of the efficiencies of tech, I do think if we figure out how to take some of those positive efficiencies and um, maintain some time for deeper work and focus, we will actually be able to get a lot more done. Um, but it's a tricky time I think we're in right now because most of us are adjusting to what does that need to look like.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and that kind of segues next into, when you talk productivity, burnout, and procrastination, or just mental health in general. You're talking
Mhm.
about AI and sort of what it's doing. I mean, we've got shortening attention spans, but now we've got AI that'll step in and sort of pick up the slack. So there's no real incentive for us to kind of work hard or exercise those muscles, I guess,
Mhm.
because we know
Mhm.
that there's a tool there that will help us out. The other interesting fact you said there was a task completion was related sometimes to boredom, and one of the things that it was proposed to me, and I kind of agree to it. Still kind of digging more into it myself. Boredom is just a lack of curiosity and feeling that you already know everything there is to know, so you don't need to know anything else. When when you're bored and you ask yourself, what am I missing? Then you're starting to pick up some activity in the brain. You're starting to say, well, wait, what am I missing? I already knew this, right? And then that sense of boredom kind of goes away. Have you noticed anything similar or other anecdotes, perhaps?
Hmm. That's interesting. So I do think that curiosity plays a role in boredom and also novelty and how we can think about novelty. So the way that you're speaking about it, it's what I hear is like when we activate more curiosity, we can see what might be novel about what we're working on or grappling with, or what's like there for us that might be something new or different, or a tweak on how we had seen it before. Um, I do think there are, so it's interesting when I work with a lot of academics. And so when I look at some of the tasks they're doing, there's like writing academic papers is a big one. And so they may not be like breaking new ground in what they're writing in a particular paragraph, right? It's like, how do I frame a narrative in a way that is compelling to the audience and makes sense? But it's not like that edge of novelty that people, especially in the sciences, are like lit up by. So what I see sometimes is like clients will have an experience, they're like in the lab and like making all these discoveries and coming up with new theories and all of that. And there's a part of that work that is super alluring and like dopamine rich. And then there's a part that's like, okay, I need to like, how do I intro this paragraph in a way that keeps the reader engaged? And that's where sometimes the like boredom can slip in. And so it's almost like, I think when we're accustomed to a lot of like learning, novelty, exploration, growth, all of those things, some of our tasks can feel boring comparatively. And so I think you're right in the like, how do I access, asking some questions around like, what is a way to look at this differently? How can I tread new ground here? How can I shake this up a little bit? What is even what is a tighter way to say this? Is like a new edge instead of it feeling more like a rote task.
Mhm.
What do you hear in that?
Yeah, so a way to, maybe do something a little differently. You said shake things up a bit. I'm guilty of that a lot with tasks that I find super boring.
Mhm.
And then what winds up happening is I wind up finding a new way to do it that takes me twice as long and is
Mm-hmm.
twice
Mm-hmm.
frustrating
Mm-hmm.
if I just done it the first way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just have to, be cognizant of that, if your task is taking you 2 hours and you spend 4 hours trying to figure out a way to do it faster, you might just
Yeah.
want to go ahead and do it the first.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's really important to switch up the context, or the how you're working, where you're working, what your sensory environment is, all of that. So sometimes I'll work with clients to have them just like stack rote tasks, but they'll do it in a place they love, listening to music they love, having their favorite beverage. We'll like create the context so that it's actually something they look forward to and can kind of get in the zone and bang things out, instead of sprinkling those tasks throughout the day and then feeling like you're confronting boredom and then like trying to motivate yourself. And then an hour later, you're doing the same thing. I found that for some people, that kind of batching is much more supportive for more boring tasks. And then I have a client who was like, he did it every Thursday morning. He's like, Thursday morning. He would get so excited because he went to his favorite coffee shop. He got his favorite beverage and he just like banged his list out. And it totally changed the cadence of his week. So it's just, I think we have a lot more options than we think we do in terms of how to structure our time and tasks and all of that. We can get really stuck in how we've been doing things and what has not been working instead of experimenting. And I love the website Coffeetivity, where you can stream coffee shop noise. I'm a big coffee shop person. So if I'm at home, I feel like I'm not by myself and can get some noise and kind of feel like I can plug away with other people, even though other people aren't there.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to try that one. I hadn't like I'd heard about background noise, and some people work with rain, some people work with city noise. I hadn't specifically heard of a coffee shop one before.
Yeah. I love it.
Check that out. So we are coming up pretty close to time here. was there anything that you felt that maybe I should have asked but didn't, or anything that maybe we should have covered but we didn't cover today?
Thanks for that. I think the only other thing is talking a little bit about the book that I wrote, The Rooted Renegade, which has tons of resources, tools, strategies about ways to fire up your nervous system, reconnect with your passions, and then create a more kind of life-giving relationship with yourself and with other people. And so it's very structured. There are over 50 exercises of all different kinds, from visualizations to journaling prompts to somatic practices. And lots of people have told me, like, it is highly dog-eared. It is on their nightstand. And it brings me great delight because I think of it as a book you can turn to again and again when you're grappling with something, and just has new things to discover. So would love if people were motivated to check that out and see what's there for you. And if you do, I'd love to hear about it.
All right, excellent. So, yes, and what's just before we go, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you in case, they get the book, they have questions? What's the best show?
So you can go to therootedrenegade.com and you'll find out about coaching, about the book, about all kinds of, there's blogs on there and other resources. So if you're interested, you can reach out there.
Excellent. Well, and as always, we will have that in the show notes for you, so you don't have to worry about, trying to write that down right now. Okay, and well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Rebecca. It was a real pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in once again for, motivation, inspiration. And, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration yourself today, then maybe just be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.
Thanks, Chris.